I can't dance, guys. I can't dance to save my life, but that would just seem like a fun way to start this video. I don't really know why. I think it's probably because I was super excited about my March reads this month. I would say that there were some solid 3 stars in there, 1 4 to 5 star, maybe 2 4 to 5 star reads, and then the rest of them were still enjoyable, passable books. There was only one book that I felt like was a little bit on the lower end of ratings for me, but that was truly because of the fact that I just wasn't too happy with the trigger contents in that book. And I didn't realize those trigger contents were present until after I'd gotten into the book, and I wasn't quite at a point where I wanted to, DNF it, but I also didn't want to, you know, give it a star rating that was higher just because of how it made me emotionally feel. But I can understand why this book has taken the internet by storm. And it was actually voted for one of the books of the years for book of the month. And so, or with book of the month, I should say. And so I definitely know it was very well received in the reading community. But that being said, what's up, everybody? Hope you guys are doing really well today, whether it's morning, evening, afternoon, tea time, breakfast time, dinner time, lunch time. If it's earlier in the day, thank you for joining me. Grab a cup of coffee and let's sit down and chat. And for those of you that are joining me in the evening, grab that glass of wine or that soda or that water, whatever it is you like to consume in the evening, and come join me as we do our March reading wrap up. As you know, I had quite an extensive collection of books on my TBR for this month because March for me is usually one of my heaviest reading months just because I go all out when it comes to the thrillers. Now, this month I did start off with a pretty hefty reading list. Just to recap, we had The Hunting Party on there by Lucy Foley. We had Final Girls by Riley Sager. We had What Lies in the Wood by Katie Alice Marshall. Can you tell I have the books next to me? We had Everything We Didn't Say by Nicole Bart. The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose. That's a lie. First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston, The Intern by Michelle Campbell, The Fury by Alex Nicolaides, The Last Party by Claire McIntosh, The Villa by Rachel Hawkins, and then last but not least, Breathless by Amy, I forgot her last name, but it starts with an H. And I can very proudly say I've completed the majority of my reading list with the exception of one novel on the original reading list, and I did actually add 3 more to that list. So without any further ado, let's jump in. Once again, guys, my name is Jaya. Welcome to J-Bay's Corner, and thank you so much for joining me this evening as we just talk about all things books. As far as this first book that I read, it was by Lucy Foley, The Hunting Party. Now, I will be the first one to say that my reading, quote unquote, does include Audible. I do think Audible is a fair consideration to be seen as reading because just like a podcast or just like, a TV series, you do have to focus, you do have to pay attention in order to be able to appreciate what's being read to you. And many, many, many times it also helps with the ambiance and the setting and just allows you to really get into the characters' headspaces as well as the atmosphere of the book. Most of these books that I'm showing you today, I did do a combination of physically reading the book as well as listening to it on Audible. I personally love Audible. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful source. I think if you're subscribed to Audible and you do enjoy buying the credits, or even if you just want to go buy the subscription and just do 1 credit a month, I think it's a great way to access multiple different books, whether it be new releases as well as fan favorites, series, whatever it might be. I also love the fact that Audible consistently has sales, so it's always nice to be able to get discounts on many of the books that are available. And so I think in general, it's just a great way to introduce yourself to new genres as well as enjoy what you already like in just a new format as you are, chewing through your favorite novels. This is not a sponsored video. I have no sponsorship with them. I just really, really enjoy them. And so I would very, very happily talk about their product because I do think it's worthwhile purchasing or subscribing to. Now, that being said, of course, other resources, if you're into Spotify now has audiobooks as well. So that's a great way to consume your books. And then Libby. Libby is also a great way to get free books. You just basically sign up for a library card and you have access to all of the library's audiobooks, and you're able to enjoy the books that way. And that's more of a free, safe way of enjoying your books as well. I know sometimes you can also ooh, pardon me, find them on YouTube. So I know some people also like to listen to their books on YouTube. That being said, this book I did actually do about 60% on audio and about 40% reading. And I will be honest, even while I was physically reading the book, I was listening to the audio component with it as well. Lucy Fillet's books for me in general, this is my third book by her that I've read. I've read The Paris Apartment, which I genuinely enjoyed and felt like my personal favorite was that one. And then I've also read The Guest List, which I think was absolutely incredible as well. This is the third book by her that I've had a chance to read, and I will say this one was not my favorite. I think in general, a lot of the characters were very unlikable. There was not a single character that I really enjoyed or was rooting for. I do think there was some growth to some of the female characters by the end of the book, which was nice to see, but I think it was a little too late. You know what I mean? And so it just made it really, really hard for me to plug into this book and jump into this book and really like get into the meat of this book just because I hated every single character in this friend group. And as far as the secondary component of this book, where there's like a completely separate to what's going on in the actual book, there is a separate mystery drama that's happening at the villa that they're staying at. And I think that character, the one who's basically the innkeeper, and then the guy who basically handles the grounds, I think they were my favorite characters in the entire book. And they do have a decent say, and the book is told from their perspective as well. So that part was a little bit more enjoyable for me. And that was probably what actually made up for how much I hated the other main characters in this book. But that subplot was so small, and I felt like it was so rushed when it was finally described and the climax of that portion of the story was revealed that I just felt like, in general, this one wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. So while many of the other Lucy Follet books have been anywhere between 3.5 to 4.25 stars for me, this one was a solid 3-star read. Would I recommend it to anybody? I would say if they like Lucy Follet and they wanted something that's just a quick, fun read, then absolutely, I would say this is something you could enjoy and definitely dig your teeth into. If you don't mind like an unlikable narrator, then I think it's also a very entertaining character development plot. I also think the psychology of many of these characters in this book, especially like the idea that we revert back to our childhood roles in group settings, was very interesting and fascinating. So I do think there's some redeemable qualities to this book. But is it a book that I'm going to ponder about and think about as, time moves forward? No, probably not. So I would give this a solid 3 stars. Moving on to our next book, I managed to read the last book of Riley Sager's, which I have not completed yet. I have read every single book written by this author for a reason. I do absolutely love the way that he writes his novels, and I think the plot points are very poignantly thought out and very interesting and fun to read. This one was no different for me. This one I did do, again, a combination of Audible and physically reading the book. I would say this one was percentage wise was probably more 70% physically reading this book for me. I think Quincy's character was very, very fascinating, and I think the character of Lisa, when she's introduced into this novel, was very well done. I do think the ending of the book is, if you've read him a lot, very, very apparent as to who the main, like, who done it guy is, or she is. Excuse me. So sorry. I'm a hot mess today between the sneezing and the burping and the coughing. Sorry, guys. But what I will say is that Quincy's character for me was very entertaining, and it was kind of nice to see her go through such a traumatic past and then be in regular real day life and her navigate the different stressors of day-to-day life as well as relationships. So it was very fun for me to read. Just a little background on this book. This book is basically about a character named Quincy Carpenter, who is one of the quote-unquote final girls. So final girls basically referring to a situation where you were involved in a mass murder scene and you were one of the few survivors. So in her case, it was in her teenage years, and many of her friends are murdered, and she's the only one that survives that night. And so it kind of follows her plot line as well as a couple of other characters that went through similar traumas in their life and how they kind of reel together. And it all starts off with basically them finding out that one of the other girls in the final girls group was found murdered. And so the other final girl, the third one, quote unquote, was Sam. And so she mysteriously appears into Quincy's life and just causes a lot of disruption and forces Quincy to really look at her personal life and how well she's handled this trauma that she's gone through, and also leads her down memory lane to kind of put together the pieces of what happened that night. Um, and like I said, I think it was very well written. I think it was a really fun read. You can definitely tell it's one of his earlier reads, but that's actually something that was enjoyable for me. So overall, I gave this a solid 4 stars. I do think this was a fun read. This is definitely something I would recommend. For me personally, though, I just love Riley Sager. I don't think I've ever read a Riley Sager book and not enjoyed it. I also feel a lot of people like The House Across the Lake. I think that one was very well written as well by him, but my personal favorite is Lock Every Door. But in general, I think he just writes a great thriller. And I do think some of them can be formulaic, but I think overall every single one does a pretty decent job of exploring a new concept or a new social um, situation, which makes it a little bit more fun and intriguing and changes up the storyline so it doesn't feel like the same cookie cutter story over and over and over again. But do I think the plot line is a little guessable? Yes, I do. I don't know if I would have been able to guess it, though, if I hadn't read so many of his books already. The closest I can compare it to is like a Hercule Poirot novel by Agatha Christie. As you may be able to see on my bookshelf, I have quite a few Agatha Christies. I love a lot of her books. But I do feel like after a certain point, her books also get a little predictable just because you get used to her formulas. But overall, very enjoyable read. Would definitely recommend. Next up, so this one is actually going to derail from the original reading list. This one is Finlay Donovan Rolls the Dice. Now, this particular book is a murder mystery, but it is a comedic murder mystery. And it's the 4th book in a series. Finlay Donovan is Killing It is the first book in this series, and it basically follows this character cast of very, very fun, colorful women and the men in their lives. And basically, this is a single mom trope, and she essentially finds herself in a position where she's accidentally thought to be a contract killer and hired by a woman to kill her husband. She never signs up for it, and then all of a sudden she's dealing with a dead body. So very, very, very comedic book. So much fun to read. And this is the 4th book in the series, following her very loyal and very spunky, spicy sidekick character named Veronica Ruiz. This author, like I said, this is her 4th book in this series that has been released. There is plans, I believe, for 7 novels to be released in total, so I'm already dying to sink my teeth into the next one. But this book made the cut for our March TBR because it was much anticipated and released this March. So I was very, very excited to be able to get my hands on this and tear through this. Literally finished this book in a day, in 3 hours flat, just sitting and reading. It was absolutely wonderful. I also think the narration for the Finlay Donovan series is very well done on Audible, so I have thoroughly enjoyed both physically reading and listening to the Audible simultaneously. So I do like to sit down, read this book with a nice bowl of popcorn while listening to my Audible and just digging through this book. It's delicious. It's so much fun. It's so funny. And it does have some very, very hot scenes in it too, if you're into that type of thing, without being too explicit. So I think overall, romance, comedy, chemistry, thrilling, everything all rolled into one. Finlay Donovan, would recommend. This was another 5-star read for me. I just absolutely adore this series. Next up, we have the much anticipated, much spoken about, much taken book talk and YouTube by storm, Magnolia Park series, book number 2. Now, I will say, as I said in my previous video, that this book was so good. This book ate for me. I definitely loved this book. You can see all my tabs here. They are not color-coded by anything in specific. I just ran out of tabs as I was reading and just had to switch it up. But I just think the way she writes, the lyrical nature of her writing is just so beautiful, and just so much fun to read. It also has like so much fashion in it, and so it's just really entertaining to read that in as well. I just think that she does a tremendous job of creating this environment and creating a story out of literally nothing. You're just following the characters' day-to-day life basically and their interactions, and it's just so much fun to read. For me personally, as far as the Magnolia Parks world goes, I definitely think I prefer Daisy Hates. I have already gotten two sweaters from this series inspo, in regards to her character. Daisy Hates is also a mob boss or gang leader's younger sister, and her brother is basically like the crime lord of London. And she is this beautiful, like very, very, you know, traumatized but beautiful, beautiful girl who's extremely smart, extremely educated, wants to basically compensate for the bloodshed caused by her brother, and so decides to go into medicine. And just like it's very fun watching her navigate this experience of being, London's infamous celebrities, family members, while still trying to make a positive imprint on the book and on the society, sorry, while also being the consciousness or the conscience, that's what I'm looking for, the conscience of these group of characters. And I think Julian's character, which is her older brother, is also just so amazing. I absolutely adore him. I absolutely have loved reading him, and I sincerely hope he gets a book of his own as well, because I just think it'd be so much fun to read. But in general, I found a lot more of the Parks characters to be very vapid and irritating, if I'm being 100% honest. Broken, yes. Drama, yes. Fun, entertaining to read, yes. But very Gossip Girl. Like to the point, like some of the Gossip Girl characters where I was like, you are kind of a pointless character. You're beautiful to look at, but you're kind of pointless. The one I'm thinking of is Nate. Please don't come after me for calling Nate Vanderbilt what I just did. But I think he was basically eye candy on the show and fun to watch because of the idiot decisions he made, but didn't have too much substance to him as a whole. That's kind of how I felt about Magnolia Parks. But I feel like this book, like, had a lot more meat to it, a lot more heart to it, enjoyed it a lot more, and definitely this was a 5-star read for me as well. Like a 4.75 to a 5-star read, and I would definitely recommend this book. So I think if you've read Magnolia Parks and you don't know what to do with it and you don't know how you felt about it, but you kind of enjoyed the storyline, you kind of enjoyed the drama, then this book I think is worth taking a delve into because I do think this one was better. Moving on. So the next book that I listened to / read was What Lies in the Woods. Now this book I think was also highly, highly entertaining. This basically also follows a similar concept to Final Girls in the sense that this girl experienced a severe trauma when she was a young child, where she's basically almost stabbed to death, and then she and her friends basically accuse a man of being the serial killer in the woods that night when this entire situation took place. And so she has put a man basically in jail, and he passes away. And so she gets this news and she doesn't know what to do with it. And it's basically processing what happened that night, as well as digging into her relationship with her friends that kind of went through this night with her, and revisiting the town that she grew up and seeing her dad again after a really long time where they've kind of had an estranged relationship. So I think overall it was very interesting. Basically, what also triggers her is the fact that there is a reporter around town basically trying to piece together what happened in the woods that night as well. And so she's just confronted with all of these memories back in a town that she doesn't want to be in. And she's pulled away from her successful job in wedding photography to now deal with her horrific past. And I think overall it was very well written, very entertaining to read. I don't know if this is just a trope that I like, this idea of like people who've been through trauma then having to reface their trauma. I just think there's something really powerful about writing that story, and if done right, it can be very uplifting and endearing, even in the sense of it being a thriller. But I personally really enjoyed this. There were a couple of twists in it that I didn't actually see coming, which made it even more enjoyable for me. So I gave this one a solid 4 stars as well. Next up, we have Everything We Didn't Say. And again, similar trope in the sense that when she was a young girl, Over the summertime, her brother and her are super close, and now they're suddenly going through this period of adolescence growth where basically they're drifting apart. It's her last summer before she goes off to college, and she's dealing with the dynamics of her best friend and that situation changing, and dealing with a boy that she really cares about and likes, that her best friend also likes. And in the midst of all of this, there is a murder that occurs that summer, and it is believed that her brother might have been the primary suspect, even though he was never accused. And so she goes back to this town years and years later, because of her daughter, who has been in the care of her parents. And she goes regularly to visit her. And when she returns back into town, she finds out that there is someone trying to create a podcast about what happened that night and bringing back to light suspicious evidence against her brother and trying to pin the crimes on him, even though he was never officially, um, found to be guilty. And also, strange things start happening around her family. And so now she's like thrust back in this situation where she needs to, um, basically face what happened in the past in order to move forward in her life. And she's faced with many characters, such as her ex and her best friend, now years later when she comes back to town after so long. And so I think this one was also very well done. Also, a solid read for me. Enjoyed this one as well. I think it was well written. I think it was fun. It was also one of those books where, like, there were multiple times where I wanted to look up what was happening in the book. Scratch that. There were multiple times I tried to look up what was going on in the book, and it's just not published enough on the internet, I feel like, where there were too many spoilers for me to read. So I was literally on the edge of my seat. Um, and while I had some theories, it wasn't until I would say the last fifth of the book that I really figured out who had done it. And when it was revealed why they had done it, that was also an interesting plot twist for me. So I think overall, a very fun read, very enjoyable, a couple of different mysteries happening at the same time, but definitely a fun, quick thriller read as well, and a palate cleanser. And I think not spoken about enough. And there is a reason this book made it to Book of the Month. That's all I'm going to say. But very, very enjoyable book. And I give props to my husband for finding this because he's the one that recommended it to me. Next up, we have The Mystery Guest. Now, this book is written by Nita Prose. It's her second book in the series. The first one is called The Maid. I also really enjoyed The Maid. The Maid I first discovered on Audible because I saw it on Book of the Month, and I didn't feel quite right jumping into that book. So I had decided that I would try it on Audible, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed that one. So when she released a second book in that world, following the main character, who's basically an autistic maid, who finds herself in tricky situations but just wants to do everything she can to help. When a second murder occurs at the hotel that she's at, and she has to deal with the spicy detective as well as, dealing with the fact that she and her protege are considered the primary suspects of murder, it was definitely very easy for me to dig into it. I do think some of the plot twists and some of the, descriptions of her childhood and what her grandmother went through, who's the one who raised her, as well as her experience with her real mother, was a little tragic, a little sad to read, but I think, again, it was well written. And while The Maid was a solid 5-star read for me, this one was a close 4-star for me as well. I do think this was very well written. And again, another book that I feel like is not publicized enough, but very, very fun read, very women empowering, very like underdog wins, very, appreciative of this book because it also gives light to the fact that people in any situation, in any career, in any field, from any background, has the capacity to be smart, intelligent, capable, and very, very bright. And I think that's something that we forget sometimes. And I think it was just really beautiful to see such a humble cast, be shown so brilliantly and really showing that people in power were the ones that were abusing their power. So I think in general, it was nice to read that and also see the reconciliation at the end. So I do think it touched on a few social topics, but I also think overall it was written very well, very, very, women empowering, and would definitely recommend. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the nuances in this book were also very enjoyable. So overall story was great, and then the deeper, meaty, gritty parts were also fun to read. Would recommend The Mystery Guest. Next up, okay, don't come after me. None of this is true. Solid 2-star read for me. I did not enjoy this. The trigger warnings are many. I would say pedophilia, grooming, unreliable narrator. That's not really a trigger warning, but you know what I mean. You know, child abuse, like just a lot of really dark ththings. I really struggle with such topics. I also didn't realize I'm matching this book, but yes, it literally matches what I'm wearing right now. Um, I think there's a lot of things that are said without actually having to be said. But I think like in general, nothing is explicitly spelled out. I think it also comes down to how you interpret the book, which is probably why this one was so popular. There are certain components of this book where I felt like at the end of the book, I was like, wait, what? Like, what actually happened? And it does follow two main female leads who basically find out that their birthdays are on the same day. And one of the girls, she leads a relatively normal life, has a beautiful husband, beautiful family, living like what looks like a luxurious life, and she's a podcaster. And then the other girl, she's also married to a man much older than her, so there's like a 40-year difference in age between them, and she wants to share her story with this podcast woman, um, and basically find a get out of jail free card for her life, and share her truth so that she can, change her life for the better. And then things just spiral out of control, and there ends up being two murders in this book. So I think overall it is a very gripping book. It does keep you on the edge of your seat. I think if you don't mind certain trigger warnings, it's a fun read. But in general, just not for me. I just think that this book made me feel a certain type of way that I didn't really feel the need to feel. I do think that what it talks about is very dark, and I know Lisa Jewell just does tend to lean more towards the dark. This was my first book by her, and I will say she seems like a great author. I really enjoyed her prose, her narration, her overall way of writing the book. But I do think it was a little too much for me. So 2-star read for me. But I do think if you're looking for something fun, fast paced, easy to read, it does have that aspect to it too, as long as you don't mind the story being just a tinge darker in terms of day to day home life. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say on that. Next up, we have The Intern. Now, this book for me started off actually not great. Then the middle I thought was really interesting and fun. Then the next half of the middle. So basically, like if we're breaking this up into quarters, first quarter I was like, eh. Second quarter I was like, okay, interesting. Third quarter I was like, eh. And then the fourth quarter I was like, okay, this has got me gripped again. So this book took me about 3 days to read. I would say the slower parts, I did need the Audible just to get me through those humps. Um, but the concept of this book is basically there's this girl, she's in law school, she has all the makings of being like valedictorian, phenomenal lawyer, very, very career driven, very, very studious, scholarship type student who is dealing with a broken home, where her brother is a hot mess and her father is not in the picture, and her brother has been arrested. And so her mom's on one side basically being like, your brother has been wrongly accused and he's in jail, like do something about it. Meanwhile, she finds out that the judge, he was one of the most celebrated judges in the country, and also one of her teachers in school is now looking for an intern, and she has the chance to join on this judge's team, only to find out that she's also the judge on her brother's case. And that's basically how the book starts off. There's also a question mark as to, you know, how genuine this judge is. There's a lot of closet skeletons for her, and it's kind of pulling out the dirty secrets of this judge's life. And so basically, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue around this woman, and it's basically about how these two women's lives collide and where they go from there. I think overall it was a great premise. I think it's written well. I just think it, for me, it could have been done a little bit better. There's no other way to really put it. But I do think it's a fun read. It's a fast paced read, and the ending did it for me. I was very happy with how the book ended, and I think overall the relationship between the two girls was, or two women, I should say, was very well fleshed out, and I think you get to see a lot of where the characters get their traits from and why they act the way that they act. So I think very well thought out book, very well planned book. I think a fast, fun paced read for sure if you're interested in seeing more character development and story background as to motivations of these characters while they're dealing with all of this, darkness in this book with the upcoming trial going on with the intern's younger brother as well as the judge's shady past. Um, for me, though, still a solid 3-star read. I think it was fun to read, fast paced, enjoyable. Definitely a fun pickup book. Not something that I'll ever think about or pick up and giggle or have memories about per se. But I do think it's a worthwhile read. It's a fun read. It's a pass for me, if that makes any sense. Next up, I have The Fury. Now, I will say Alex Michaelides in general, I think just writes stellar books. I think the way he does character development and story development is just very entertaining, and he just knows how to throw twists into the book that just take you for a loop. I will say I kind of predicted who had done it in this book. I just think the way that it was revealed was very interesting for me. And I think the characters in this book, it was just really enjoyable to see the cast and their relationships. Also, not the greatest character cast in the sense that there's not too many characters in the series that I truly related to, enjoyed, or like wanted to be like, oh, I want you to win. Like all of them kind of had their quirks where I was like, you're not the greatest person. But I do think overall the story is just so beautifully written. I think the way he writes, his language, his prose is just beautiful. And there's a lot of psychology, human sociology, that's kind of brought into his novels, which I think is really enjoyable. It does comment on society and societal's way of thinking. And there are some components of psychological, um, not psychological, I would say therapy like components to this book as well, as the main character kind of faces his own past and his life, and he kind of shares scenes and snippets from his therapy sessions in the past. And I think that really helps flesh him out as a character in this book, the narrator, that is, who is Elliot. But I think overall, book is very well written, very, very enjoyable. Basically, a group of characters that are basically revolving in this golden world of actors and actresses end up going to a private island as a group, and they all have secrets to share, and then there ends up being a murder. And it's basically the story of why it happened, how it happened, and the events leading up to it. But I think overall, very, very enjoyable book. Solid 4.5 stars for me. I love Alex Michaelides. I will read anything he puts out, and I always find that when I finish his books, it does leave me chewing on some things and thinking about things. So I think overall, just very well written plot line, a very enjoyable book. Would definitely recommend. In case you were wondering what his other books are, The Silent Patient and The Maidens were also amazing books that were written by him. In terms of favorites, I would say The Silent Patient was absolutely my top favorite book. I did not see any of the curveballs coming in that book, and I think it was just very, very well written. The second book that he's written is The Maidens, which is set on a college campus, and I really enjoyed that book too. Lots of fun. Pardon me. I will say some of the twists in that book I didn't see coming either. I do think the final um, reveal was a little predictable, but I think overall very, very well written book. And as far as this book, again, very, very end, a little bit predictable, but I think the events that led up to it are not things that I saw coming, and I definitely enjoyed watching the story unfold. So I would say in order, The Silent Patient, The Fury, and then The Maidens for me personally, but in general, recommend Alex Michaelides if that type of thriller sounds like something you would enjoy, where it has a psychological component to the thriller as well. Next up was The Last Party. This was a solid 2.75 stars to 3 stars for me. I think I rounded it up to 3 stars on Goodreads, if I'm not mistaken, because they don't really do percentage stars. But I struggled with this book. I almost DNF'd this book. I'm not going to lie. I almost 100% had to do this on Audible because I just was really, really struggling getting into this book and reading this book. But basically, there is a huge party that happens on the Halves side of the lake, which is basically created by outsiders to this small town. And then you have the locals who are on the other end of the division between the lakeside properties and the rest of the town. And the guy who gets murdered is like a celebrity, very well known, but also very disliked human being. And basically, this story follows two detectives basically tracing back what happened that night and trying to figure out who the murderer is. One of the detectives is a local in that town, and so she also has moments where she might be implicated in the proceedings of what happened. And then the other character is a little bit newer. The other detective, I should say, is a little bit newer to the area, but is also dealing with his own tragedies and his own trauma. And so overall, I think the character development of the detectives was really entertaining to read, but I think the actual murder mystery and the rest of the cast was just so despicable for me that I truly did not enjoy the majority of this book. I think also at the end, the whodunit, like I understood why it happened, but it honestly made me mad and sad at the same time, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I struggled with this book. I don't think this one had as many trigger warnings for me personally as compared to None of This Is True, but it does have topics of alcoholism, topics of rape, topics of cheating in relationships, things like that. But I think they're done in a more subtle way where it's not as glaringly in your face, but done in a way where you can see it's a powerful motivator in the plot line and the story without making you feel as ick, at least for me, the way that it was written. But those are some trigger warnings for anyone who is affected by such topics, as I'm sure many of us are. But for me personally, I just really struggled with this book. I don't think it's a bad book by any means. I think if I was in the right mindset, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. But for me personally, considering how excited I was to read this, because I was really, really excited to read this. And then once I actually started reading it and listening to it, I was like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. So unfortunately, this one was a little bit disappointing this month. But I would say solid 2.75 to 3 stars for me. So not quite as bad as None of This Is True, but not on the top end either. And then the last book that I read was First Lie Wins. Now, this is a solid 5-star read for me. I think this was absolutely phenomenal. I think the way that it's written is so good. I think the fact that both the main characters are morally gray characters was very interesting to read, and that's actually something that's discussed throughout the book. This was also the book that I read for my book club this month. I'm part of a book club called the Overbooked Book Club. We tend to meet the last Wednesday every month to discuss the book of the month, and we usually vote on Facebook as to what we want to read. Anyone that's interested is always welcome to join us, and I'm trying to do a little bit more themed-based books in that group as well. But we have a very colorful, wonderful group of people that join us on a monthly basis to discuss our books. But this one was a fan favorite. We definitely enjoy this book, and I would definitely recommend this. I actually don't want to say too much about this book because I feel like half the fun is like learning who this character is and just like getting through the book. So I don't want to talk too much about the plot of this book. I know that's horrible to hear from someone that you're probably coming to see like, oh, what did she read? What's good? What does she recommend? So I know that's super frustrating to hear, but I will say like solid 5-star read for me. Props to Book of the Month for putting this out there and for me to be exposed to this because otherwise I never would have found this book, and probably one of my favorite reads of the year. Genuinely enjoyed it. I think the characters are hilarious. I think the character development is great. I think that the plot lines, the twists, the sitting on the edge of your seat, nail biting is just so much fun. I think the drama that's occurring within the book is just so great. So many layers to it as well. But just very, very, very well written book. For me personally, thoroughly enjoyed it. Writing style is absolutely beautiful, flowed like water. I 110% only physically read this book. I did not listen to Audible for this book at all. Thoroughly, thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed this book. Finished it in about 3 days. There were multiple days in the middle that I just did not read it. I probably read about a page. But when I talk about like physically sitting down and actually reading this book, finish it in about 2.5 days. So great book. worth reading, hooks you from like chapter one. Great book. And that, my dears, is basically our March reads. Oh my gosh, I forgot to mention one book. I'm so sorry, guys. So I just wanted to throw back that book in here somewhere. I also happened to read The Villa by Rachel Hawkins this month. That was the book of choice for my second book club that I'm a part of, known as Paper and Glam. That's run by a lovely woman named Lisa Marie Landreth. She is absolutely phenomenal at making sure that all of the information regarding book club gets out to all us ladies, and has just made such a great environment for us to get together and discuss books. So if anyone's interested in joining, please do. She's also really good about speaking to all of us and curating a very eclectic collection of books so that we have the opportunity to get out of our comfort zone and really enjoy multiple different books out there. But coming back to The Villa by Rachel Hawkins, I don't physically have that book right now, which is probably why I didn't make it on this video cut, because I just completely forgot about it. But that book was basically following a woman who has just gotten separated from her husband, going through divorce, and has a best friend who's a little bit on the narcissistic side, but literally have been children best friends. And they end up going on a trip together, and her best friend has become insanely successful, and her husband is harassing her simultaneously in regards to her divorce. And basically, she's an author, and her best friend is also an author. And so they end up in this exclusive resort, this exclusive villa, where she finds out that there has been a gruesome murder that happened multiple years ago. And so she starts kind of digging into the history of the book to get inspired to write her new novel when interesting things starts happening along the plots of the book. I think that one was very fun to read, very fast-paced read. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that my mother-in-law actually borrowed the book from me, which is why I don't have it right now physically, but she's saying that she enjoyed it thoroughly as well, and she's finishing it up as well. I would say that book for me was also a solid 3-star read. I do think it was a very fun read. I think it was definitely a higher 3-star read, if that makes any sense, in the sense that it is something that I would recommend to other people. I do think it's a fun palate cleansing book. I don't think it was so out of the ordinary or made me think so hard about the book that I was like, oh my God, this is like one of my favorite mysteries of all time. But I do think it was a very enjoyable read while I was going through it. Lots of female dynamics there, lots of female character empowerment, female character development, looking into the darker sides of relationships and power struggles. But I think overall the book was written well. I did definitely enjoy the flashbacks more, talking about the history of what happened at that place and the characters that were in it, than the modern day part of the book. But I do think it was an enjoyable, fast-paced read as well. So for anyone who's just looking for a quick palate cleanser, female-focused characters, fast-paced mystery novel with the combination of flashback as well as like Regency times to like modern day, I do think it was a fun read. I think the closest I would compare it to is like The Lost Apothecary. I think it has the same vibes as like the Sarah Penner book, Lost Apothecary. But I did enjoy The Lost Apothecary a lot more. But I do think it was a very enjoyable read, and I do think if anyone is interested, they should definitely pick that book up. Great for a beachside read or a quick, like, rainy day read inside of the house. But yeah, those were my thoughts on The Villa by Rachel Hawkins, and I do apologize that I needed to add this little clip. Yeah, because your girl forgot about it. I would say that overall I had a pretty great reading month. I had a total of 3 5-star reads, about 2 or 3 books that were like solid 4 stars to 4.5 stars, and then the rest of them were probably average to meh. But I would only say there's one true miss for me, and that was None of This Is True. So overall, a great reading month. Do I feel like I'm in a reading slump? No. Do I feel like I would have loved to transition into dark academia or more, fantasy? But I will say, after finishing all these, I did need a palette cleanser. So right now I am starting off my month of April with a new Lynn Painter book, Happily Never After, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that as well. But overall, great month of reading, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. I know it's a long one, so thank you for sticking with me till the end. And I hope this helps you pick your next read. If you have any comments or thoughts about your favorite thrillers that you have read or would recommend, or if you have read any of these books and you have different opinions or thoughts, please don't hesitate to share them with me. I'm always excited to hear what other people have to say. And that's honestly why I started this channel, because I feel like it's just so refreshing, this community in general, just for us to share our thoughts and enjoy reading as a whole. And it's just so great to have an audience to talk to about my thoughts on these books, because I feel like sometimes that community is not always available to us. So please, please, please don't ever hesitate to share your thoughts on books with me. And if you have any recommendations for me to read, definitely throw them my way, because likely or not, I will get to it at some point. I would say about 50% of my bookshelf, maybe even 60% of my bookshelf, comes from recommendations from other people. So let me know what you think of these books. Let me know what books are on your radar. Let me know what books you've read recently that you absolutely love. And I will catch you on the next video. Bye, guys.